Hello everyone, welcome back. Tonight's story is one of gentle adventure and ancient wonder. We'll be wandering through the quiet sands of Egypt, where a pyramid rests under the starlit sky, waiting to share its long-forgotten secrets. This is a calming tale of still corridors, soft torchlight, and the quiet companionship of a curious heart drawn to history and mystery. Let your breathing slow, your muscles soften, and your thoughts begin to drift. There is no rush, just stillness, just peace. If you enjoy these soothing bedtime stories and want to keep this calm feeling with you each night, don't forget to follow the channel. Click the little bell so you'll always know when a new tale is ready. And share this story with someone who could use a peaceful escape tonight. Now, let's begin. The air was quiet and warm, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. A soft breeze slipped across the sand dunes like silk, barely moving the golden grains that had been there for thousands of years. The moon hung heavy in the sky, a polished coin surrounded by stars. Each one blinked slowly above the quiet earth. And below them sat the pyramid. It was not one of the famous ones, not the tall giants that drew crowds and flashing cameras. But now, with her pack down and her tent still folded, she just stood and stared at the pyramid. She was not here to dig or to measure or to take. She was here to rest, to listen, and maybe, just maybe, to dream. Her journal was half full, her pen smooth and eager. But tonight, she wasn't ready to write tonight. She only wanted to sit and be still. So she laid out her blanket beside the pyramid, just at its base, not in the shadow, not in the light. Somewhere in between, the stones behind her held the warmth of the day, and the sand in front of her cooled slowly like tea left to steep. She leaned back. Looking up, the sky was endless. The stars were so sharp and slow. It felt like you could pluck them from the sky and hold them in your palm. The kind of night where nothing needed to be said. And then she heard it, a soft sound, not sharp or sudden, just present like a whisper behind a curtain, like someone thinking out loud. Just under their breath, Isla sat up, alert but not afraid. She looked at the pyramid. It hadn't moved, but there was something, a pulse, a presence. She placed a hand on the stone. Warm, rough, old. It didn't speak, but she felt something. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe not. She whispered to it, "Hello." The pyramid did not answer, but the silence felt thicker. As if it was listening, she smiled, then reached into her bag and pulled out her little lantern. It gave off a soft amber glow, flickering like firelight, just enough to see the stones around her, carvings worn thin shapes softened by time. She traced one with her finger. It was smooth, familiar, a falcon, maybe, or a crown. She sat like that for a long time, tracing, listening, not expecting anything, just resting with the past. Then the wind picked up, just a little, and the sand around the pyramid shifted just slightly. Her lantern flickered, and something shimmered in the corner of her eye. A seam, a line between the stones that hadn't been there before. Thin, delicate, as if the pyramid had exhaled and opened a single eye. She stood, approached, lantern in hand. There, tucked into the side of the pyramid, was a narrow opening. Not large, not threatening, just waiting. She didn't speak. She didn't think. She simply stepped inside. It was cool. The air felt different, drier, stiller, the kind of silence that wraps around your ankles and rises up your spine. The light from her lantern danced across the walls, smooth, straight, no carvings here, just clean stone, placed with care centuries ago. The hallway bent slightly, curving like a stream around a stone. She followed it. Soft steps, no rush inside. The world felt distant, like she had stepped not just into a building, but into a memory, one that was not hers, but one that welcomed her just the same. She passed a doorway, low and narrow. Inside was a room no larger than her tent, empty. Dust in the corners, and in the center, a small square platform stone, flat, undisturbed. She sat beside it, not on it. Just near the lantern hummed quietly, its glow soft as breath, and in that moment she closed her eyes. She imagined the builders, not kings, not pharaohs, just hands and hearts and sweat, lifting stone after stone. Working under the same moon she now sat beneath, she imagined them singing, not loudly, just to themselves, rhythms to pass the time, voices carried by wind, now tucked into the very walls that surrounded her. She leaned her head against the stone. It was cool and solid, a kind of comfort she didn't know she needed. Time passed, maybe minutes, maybe hours. She did not sleep, but she drifted, thoughts soft, breath slow. Then from deeper within, she heard it again, the whisper, this time more distinct, still not words, but something gentle of feeling. She rose slowly, lifted her lantern, and moved deeper into the pyramid. The hallway narrowed, but the floor was smooth, untouched. She walked for a long time, turning, descending the lantern always a step ahead of the dark, until she reached a chamber. This one was different. A large space, circular. The ceiling arched above like a night sky made of stone, and in the center, a pool of still water, perfectly round, perfectly quiet. She knelt beside it. The reflection showed only the lantern and her face. Calm, curious, she dipped her fingers into the water. Cool, deeper than it looked. It made no sound, but as the ripples spread, so did a feeling. Not fear, not excitement, something else. Something like being remembered. She didn't move. She just let it wash over her, and as the ripples faded, so did her tension. Her shoulders softened. Her breath deepened the pyramid, the sand, the stars. All of it seemed to pause and watch her. Not as a stranger, but as a visitor long expected. She whispered again, "Thank you." And the chamber remained quiet, peaceful, patient. A place not for noise or answers, but for stillness, for breath, for sleep. She lay beside the pool, blanket around her. Lantern dimmed, and the pyramid kept watch as the desert night deepened and dreams began to drift in, like grains of sand carried on a silent wind. The desert slept deeply above, a thick blanket of stars drawn tight across the night sky, far below. Under that blanket, Isla rested in the quiet heart of the pyramid. The walls around her were stone in time. They didn't creak or groan or shift. They just held space, still and patient, as they had done for thousands of years. She didn't wake with a start. There was no alarm, no urgency, only the soft return of thought, like a tide gently washing in. She opened her eyes and saw the dim flicker of her lantern, still warm, still alive. The pool beside her had not moved. It reflected the chamber's dome above, and in that curve of stone she saw herself small and calm. She sat up slowly, stretching one arm, then the other. Her joints made soft noises, quiet cracks like distant pebbles tapping in rhythm. She smiled without thinking. There was no reason to be awake, but she was, and it felt right. The air in the chamber had a weight to it, not heavy, but complete, like being wrapped in a memory that asked nothing of you. It didn't push, it didn't pull, it just welcomed. She stood, careful not to disturb the pool's stillness. Its surface was so calm, it might have been glass. With her lantern lifted once more, she turned to explore the rest of the chamber. The walls curved gently, forming a full circle. At the far edge, opposite where she had entered, a small archway stood, not carved elaborately, just shaped, as if someone had pressed their hand against the stone and said, "This way." She walked through it. The corridor beyond was narrower, cooler. The air felt like quiet water, curved again. The pyramid always favoring gentle turns rather than harsh angles. The light from her lantern pooled ahead of her steps, showing smooth floors and faint markings along the walls. They weren't hieroglyphs, not quite. They were older perhaps, or simply different. Symbols she didn't recognize, but they didn't feel foreign. She ran her fingers along them, each groove shallow and careful. Not art, not warnings, just traces. The hallway opened into another chamber, this one smaller, square, with a flat ceiling supported by thick columns. Dust settled in the corners, undisturbed, and in the center sat a low stone table, more like an altar, but without offering, just presence. She sat beside it, placing her lantern on its surface. The light spread out evenly, touching the far walls with gold. This room felt different from the others, not heavier, just more aware. She closed her eyes, letting her hand rest on the stone, and as she sat, she imagined the pyramid not as a building, but as a being, not alive in the way animals live, but in the way trees live, quiet-rooted, observant. A kind of presence that doesn't blink, doesn't rush, but always sees, and in the stillness. She remembered something from her childhood, a book about explorers, about deserts and temples and golden sand. She remembered tracing her fingers over illustrations of pyramids, wondering what they smelled like inside, what they sounded like. She had never imagined they would be. So gentle, she leaned back against a column. It was cool and dry, solid in a way few things in life ever felt above her. The ceiling bore faint carvings, circled stars, a long curve like a crescent moon stretched across the stone. It was hard to see clearly, but the shapes comforted her. She imagined ancient hands carving them, not with grandeur, but with care. She whispered to the room, "I wish I could know what this meant to you." Of course, there was no answer, but the silence that followed felt warm. She stood again, brushing the dust from her knees. The pyramid invited motion, not urgency. She followed the next passage, smaller than before, sloping slightly downward. The lantern swayed with each step, and with it, her shadow danced along the narrow walls, like an echo of her movement, a reflection in stone. The path grew quieter the deeper she went. The silence no longer just absence of noise, but presence of stillness, complete whole. She passed niches carved into the walls. Each held a small bowl or jar. Most were empty, some held sand. Others, bits of faded fabric, each offering its own whisper of story. She didn't touch them, just bowed her head slightly as she passed a small respect, instinctive and easy. At the end of the corridor, she found a door, or what had once been a door. Now it was simply an opening, square and black beyond the edge of her lantern's glow. She stepped through and into something that felt like memory itself. This chamber was vast, wider than any she had seen before the ceiling disappeared into shadow. The floor was smooth, but scattered with shapes. Tall urns, sloped statues, rows of carved stone boxes. Not a burial chamber, not quite a museum of silence. She moved among the shapes, careful. Some objects were wrapped in cloth, others stood naked and proud. There were no labels, no explanations, just stories told in form and dust. Her lantern caught on something, a carved face, worn but elegant, eyes closed. Mouth soft, as if sleeping. She paused. It looked peaceful. She imagined someone sculpting it, a loved one perhaps, wanting to preserve that calm forever. A quiet goodbye in stone. Isla moved deeper into the chamber and found a bench carved into the wall. It welcomed her like an old friend. She sat again, lowered her lantern, and just listened to the silence, to the breath of stone, to the memories that didn't speak in words. She wondered what this pyramid had seen. Not the wars of kings, but the smaller things: a worker singing to himself in the morning, a child hiding from the sun in its shade, a woman tracing the same symbols she now passed with gentle fingers. The pyramid had gathered them all, stored them like wind stores scent, unseen but lingering, and now it shared them with her. Softly, without urgency, she felt no fear, no hurry, only a deep, slow gratitude. And in that moment, she closed her eyes again. Let the stillness wrap around her. Let her thoughts drift like dust in sunbeams. Let the pyramid hold her gently, like it had done for so many souls before she didn't dream. But she rested, and far above, the desert continued its long, quiet sleep under the stars. A morning outside had begun to stir, but deep inside the pyramid, time didn't matter. No sun reached the stone, no birds called from above, only the soft pulse of stillness, carrying on as it had for centuries. Isla opened her eyes to the same soft glow of her lantern. Its light had dimmed to a warm ember, resting beside her on the stone bench. Her body ached faintly in that pleasant way. After a long stretch of stillness, she rubbed her eyes, yawned without sound, and looked around the quiet chamber. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything felt slightly different. There was something restful in her bones, as if the pyramid had shared a piece of its peace with her. She rose gently, picked up the lantern, and continued deeper into the chamber. Her feet padded softly on the smooth stone floor, each step like an echo folding into itself. The tall urns stood where she had left them, silent, steady, their surfaces patterned with dust and time. She paused beside a long, flat stone platform near the far wall. A kind of table. It was carved from a single slab, its edges rounded with age. The surface was smooth, but in one corner, a tiny cluster of markings caught her eye. They were worn, but still visible circles of feather, and a small boat. She ran her fingers over them. They didn't speak in words, but she understood something travel weightlessness. A journey across. Not across land, not across water, but something else. She traced the featherlight, balanced, maybe the heart. She wasn't sure. But it felt right. She sat beside the platform for a while, breathing with the quiet, letting the room's long-held calm settle deeper into her then. With a soft breath, she rose again. There was another passage set low, just beyond the back wall of the chamber. She had almost missed it. It wasn't carved tall like the others, just a gentle arch in the stone, only high enough to crouch through. She stepped forward and ducked beneath it on the other side. The air felt slightly different. Not musty, not cold, just older. This corridor was tighter, the ceiling lower, and the path slightly sloped. She followed it slowly, her lantern brushing the walls with liquid light. The surface here was less polished, more textured. She ran her hand along it as she walked, feeling every subtle dip and rise. There were more carvings here, not pictures, not symbols, patterns, swirls, grids, long curving lines that followed the passage like gentle waves. She walked and watched them. Her thoughts softened, became rhythm, like the patterns were being written inside her as she passed, not to be remembered with her mind, but with her breath. Her pulse eventually, the passage opened again, this time into a tall, narrow room. Like a tower turned on its side, the floor was smooth. The walls climbed up into the dark, and in the center of the room, another platform, this one round. She stepped forward and saw that the ceiling, high above, had a tiny hole, just wide enough for a single thread of light to fall through. A shaft, the beam cut down from the sky, perfectly still, and where it landed, the platform glowed, not with brightness, but with clarity. The dust in the beam drifted like gold thread in water, and in that space, time seemed to hold its breath. Isla sat at the edge of the beam, not in it, just close enough to feel its presence. It felt like sunlight, remembered. She imagined the builders measuring the stars, aligning stone with sky, placing this shaft with quiet certainty, so that once a day, for just a moment, light would find this room. And now she sat in it, not because she was meant to, not because it was her time, but because she was here, and that was enough. She closed her eyes and listened again. The pyramid did not speak, but its silence shaped her thoughts, softened them, like water rounding stone. She sat a long time, long enough that the light shifted, not much, just enough to slide away from the center of the platform. And when the room was once again wrapped in soft shadow, he stood and whispered her thanks. The path onward curved around the far edge of the room. A staircase now, worn steps carved into the wall itself. Winding upward, she climbed, each step narrow, But steady, the lantern showed her carvings again. This time, small hands. Open palms, rows of them, lining the way, as if blessing her ascent or simply remembering all those who had walked before at the top of the stairs. She reached a landing and a doorway, this one framed in a rectangular arch. The stone smoother again, more deliberate. She stepped through into a chamber filled with color-soft, faded paint still clung to the walls red ochre, gold, soft green. Not bright, not fresh, but present like dreams that still remembered themselves. Figures stood along the wall. Not people. Ideas: a bird with a sun in its claws, a man with a jackal's head, a woman with stars for eyes. They watched her without staring. Not guardians, not warnings. Just part of the place, Isla moved through the chamber slowly, respectfully, letting the shapes wash over her. In the center, a small dais, nothing on it, just stone. But above it, the ceiling had a mural, a river, flowing not across the ceiling, but through it. Painted in long, soft curves, tiny boats drifted along its length. Some carried animals, others stars. She lay on her back beside the dais and looked up. Let the image fill her sight. It reminded her of falling asleep in the back seat of a car as a child, watching streetlights slide across the ceiling. The feeling of being carried. That's what this room felt like. A passage, a quiet ferry through a space between places. She let her hand rest on her chest, felt her breath rise and fall, matched the rhythm of the painted river for a long time. She didn't move, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't need to. There was nowhere to go, nothing to solve. Only stillness, only this ancient room that had waited without expectation. Eventually she sat up, looked around once more, tucked the memory of the river into her heart, then stood and followed the passage that led onward. The pyramid had not run out of rooms. It had not run out of quiet. There would always be another curve, another chamber, another breath of stone, and Isla would walk it, not to reach a destination, but because each step felt like part of a lullaby, carried on the breath of ancient air. She held her lantern and stepped forward once more. The passage beyond the mural chamber narrowed again. The pyramid seemed to breathe in cycles, wide spaces and narrow turns, and motion, each corridor guiding Isla not with force, but with invitation. She stepped quietly into the narrowing hall. The stone underfoot was smooth and faintly warm. As if the pyramid remembered the sun even here deep within, her lantern hummed gently in her hand, casting soft amber light on the walls around her. The carvings here were different again. Not symbols, not scenes, just lines, simple, deliberate lines that curved along the wall like wind-shaping dunes. She walked slowly, letting her fingers brush the grooves. The walls felt alive with patience, every inch crafted not in haste, but with the calm of someone who knew time would stretch long and wide. The corridor bent left, and again, each curve quiet and graceful, like a lullaby told in stone eventually. Isla reached a chamber so small, she almost missed it. There was no doorway, just a space opened like a breath caught between turns. She stepped inside. The ceiling here was low, just above her head, the floor sunken slightly in the center, and in that soft hollow, a scattering of tiny stone figurines. No taller than her hand, some shaped like animals, a lion lying down, a bird with wide wings, a cat curled into sleep. Others were people, hands held together, heads bowed. Each was worn with time, edges smoothed, but none broken. They had not been placed in rows. They were scattered, but gently dot, as if they had been left here in thought. Isla knelt among them, careful not to disturb. She reached out to touch a small figure shaped like a jackal. Its eyes were simple dots, its back arched slightly, as if mid-step. She wondered who had made it, who had carried it here. Was it an offering, a memory, a token? Maybe it didn't matter. She leaned back against the wall, let her body rest again, let her mind soften. The pyramid asked nothing of her. It didn't pull, it didn't teach, it simply shared. A quiet place to be, nothing more. She closed her eyes and imagined hands long gone, placing these figurines one by one, maybe speaking to them, maybe just holding them, maybe crying, and the room held all of that. Not like a museum, but like a dream remembered in pieces. When she opened her eyes again, the lantern light had shifted, fallen gently on a carving in the far wall she hadn't noticed before. A doorway etched into stone. Not a real door. Just an image, a frame, but inside the frame, a scene. A person standing beneath stars, arms open, eyes closed. Around them, lines like wind or music or thought. She rose slowly and walked to it. Her fingers hovered above the surface. It wasn't meant to be touched. It was meant to be felt. She stepped back, sat again among the figurines, and the silence folded around her. Soft as wool. Light as a sigh. There was no sound in this chamber. But the hush had weight. The kind that sinks into your shoulders and softens them. Time passed again. She didn't measure it. Eventually she stood, left the small chamber behind, and followed the corridor deeper still. It curved. Always curved. The pyramid never forced corners. Everything flowed. She reached a stairway. Wide. Shallow. Worn smooth in the center. It spiraled downward. Slowly. Gracefully. She descended without hurry. Each step a quiet drum. Each breath drawn from deep in her chest. The stair ended in another wide room, but this one was unlike the others. Here. The walls were covered in small mirrored tiles. Not modern mirrors, just slivers of polished stone. Set into the wall like a mosaic of stars. And when her lantern's light touched them, they shimmered. Not brightly. But gently. Like moonlight on water. She stepped inside. Her reflection followed her. Multiplied. Softened. Scattered. She was not many. She was simply more. She placed the lantern in the center of the room and sat beside it. The light bloomed, outward. Catching each tiny mirror, each sliver of stone. The room glowed. Not in brightness. But in comfort. It felt like sitting inside a memory that smiled when you remembered it. She lay down slowly, let her eyes wander the ceiling. The same mirrored pattern continued above. No symbols. No words, just pieces. Pieces that together made a whole. She breathed. Listened. Let her thoughts wander where they pleased. She thought of stars, of how they are always there, even when you can't see them. Of how light travels across impossible distances. Softly. Silently. She wondered if thoughts could do the same. If the people who had made this place had left their thoughts here. Not with words, but with presence. And maybe she was hearing them now. Not with ears, but with her bones. Her breath. She thought of nothing. Then of everything. Then of nothing again. The mirrored walls didn't judge. They just reflected, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, like herself, whole, quiet, still. Eventually she sat up, looked around the room one last time. Every surface now familiar, every reflection a reminder. She picked up her lantern and walked toward the far wall. There, a small gap, a narrow passage she hadn't noticed before. She stepped into it. The walls here were plain again. The light found no mirrors, only stone. But that was enough. She followed the path, letting her thoughts settle once more. The pyramid held many spaces, each one different, each one necessary. And she had not come to find answers, only to walk, to listen, to be. She stepped forward, and the path curved gently ahead. The corridor curved, not sharply, but softly, like the gentle bend of a river. Each step Isla took was quiet. The lantern's light followed her closely, and the air grew cooler again, but not cold, just enough to draw her breath deeper, slower. She could no longer hear the silence. It had become part of her. No longer something she noticed, but something she carried. This passage was longer than the others, its walls smooth and unmarked, The ceiling arched a little more than usual, making her feel smaller, but not unwelcome. She walked without thought. Only movement. The kind of movement that happens after sleep, when your body knows what to do. And your mind has let go. Eventually, the corridor began to rise, gradually, barely noticeable at first. But as she continued, she realized she was climbing again, the floor rising gently beneath her feet, the walls still curving, like a spiral staircase without steps. The passage opened slowly into a new chamber. Wider. Taller. Filled with breath. She stepped into it and paused. The floor was made of different stone. Not polished. But patterned. A mosaic of swirling shapes, blues and reds and faded golds woven into long, curling paths. She stepped forward carefully. The design spread beneath her like ripples in a pond. In the center of the room, the pattern formed a circle, a spiral within the larger spiral. And there, in the very middle, a cushion. Warm, soft looking. Deep maroon with gold thread along the edge. Not something ancient, something familiar. She walked slowly toward it, kneeling beside it, reaching out to press her hand into the fabric. Warm, surprisingly warm. She sat. Cross. Leg. And let herself be still. The room was silent, but not empty. There was a presence here, a kind of stillness that didn't come from being alone, but from being remembered. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw people sitting here before her. Not crowds. Just one, then another, and another. One by one across the years. Each drawn to the quiet, each needing something different. And the room gave it to them. Not answers. Just space. A place to sit with what they carried. She didn't try to think, but thoughts came anyway, drifting slowly, without sharp edges. She remembered her first visit to a museum as a child. How quiet it had been. Not because it was required, but because people felt it. That kind of quiet was here too. She remembered a night she couldn't sleep, and her mother had come to sit beside her, not to talk, not to explain, just to be there. And now this room sat beside her in the same way. She didn't know how long she stayed. Time had uncoiled from her wrist and wandered off. When she opened her eyes, she felt rested. Not in the way you feel after sleep. But in the way you feel when someone has listened to you, even if you never said a word. She stood slowly, touched the cushion once more, and smiled. There was a new passage now. She hadn't seen it before. It led off to the left. Low at first, then widening. She took her lantern and followed. The air was warmer. She felt it before she saw it. The walls were different again, carved in long flowing shapes. Not symbols. Not language. Just motion. The floor beneath her was scattered with soft sand, carried in by wind. Or time. And the smell of something faint. Spices. Earth. Dry flowers. She stepped into the next room and gasped gently. The chamber was filled with baskets. Dozens. Maybe more. Some open, some covered with lids woven from reeds. She walked carefully between them. Each basket had its own place. Its own shape. Some wide and short, others tall and thin. Some sealed with wax, others tied shut with cord. She didn't open them. It didn't feel right. But she did kneel beside one and gently press her hand to its lid. It was warm. Not from heat. But from age. Like the warmth of a rock that has sat in the sun for years and years, and remembers. She moved to another. This one smaller. It was wrapped in linen, carefully folded. She imagined hands folding it. Slowly. Lovingly. This room wasn't a storage. It was a memory. Not objects. But offerings. Little pieces of a life. Gathered. Tucked away. Some filled, some empty, but all intentional. She didn't need to know what was inside. She could feel it. This was not a place of wealth. But of worth. She sat on the floor and let her hand rest lightly On one of the baskets, Dot, it was enough. She breathed in the soft scent, the quiet dust, and let it wrap around her. When she finally stood again, she bowed her head slightly to the room. A simple thank you. She stepped out through a narrow arch in the far wall. The next corridor was cool again, Dot, and dark. Her lantern flickered against the walls, showing nothing, at first Dot only smooth stone. But then the wall changed, became covered in thin vertical lines, Dot dozens, Dot hundreds. Etched, lightly, Dot not deep, like someone had marked each day as it passed. Some were grouped, some stood alone, Dot all of them quiet. She ran her fingers over them as she passed, each one a breath, a footstep, a pause. She thought of all the people who had come before her, not pharaohs, not rulers, not just others, with quiet hearts and the need to sit inside silence. The corridor ended in a round chamber with a single thing inside. A chair, Dot stone, simple, no carvings, no cushion. Just a chair, facing a blank wall. She walked to it, sat down, Dot, and smiled. Sometimes you don't need a view. You don't need an answer. You just need a place to sit, Dot, and breathe. She let her lantern rest on the floor beside her. Its light cast a long shadow on the wall. Her shadow sat with her, a quiet companion. She stayed like that, Dot no need to move, no reason to hurry. Only breath, only stillness. And the pyramid watched Dot as it always had, and always would. The stone chair cradled her gently, not in comfort, but in quiet understanding. Its back was straight, its seat unpadded, and yet Isla felt no discomfort, only presence, as though the weight of sitting was being held for her, as though the pyramid itself was sharing the stillness. She did not know how long she remained seated. Time did not flow in this place. It drifted, wove slowly through the air like desert wind through tall grass. She breathed in, breathed out. The lantern flickered softly at her feet, and the wall before her held no image. But it held everything. Eventually, Isla stood, her legs slow but sure. She lifted the lantern, and her shadow rose behind her. Together, they moved toward the passage that waited behind the chair. It was narrow, barely shoulder width. A short tunnel carved into stone, straight and sloped slightly upward. She followed it carefully, one step, then another, the quiet never leaving her. The passage led to a new chamber, this one unlike any she had seen. It was wide but low, and the ceiling curved like the inside of a dome. There were no carvings, no paintings, no baskets, only rows of stones arranged along the floor in circular patterns. At first glance, they looked like random groupings, but the more she looked, the more she felt them. They were placed deliberately. Each circle centered around a small empty space, as if someone once sat or knelt in the middle of each. She stepped between them, moved quietly, as though entering a room where others were still speaking in thought. She knelt near one, placed her lantern just beside it. The stones in this circle were smooth and flat, some gray, some a deep red, others gold-tinged with flecks of white, each one the size of her palm, each one resting lightly in the sand. She didn't touch them. She only looked, then closed her eyes, and something stirred. Not a sound, not a voice, just the memory of movement, the sense that this space had held stillness like a bowl holds water, and now she was tasting it. She imagined people here, many, but never at once. One at a time, like waves coming to shore, and leaving, always leaving. She sat in the space, beside the circle, not entering it, only sharing its breath. The floor beneath her was warm again, not heated, just held by the earth. She sat with her legs folded, her hands resting gently on her knees, her eyes closed. And the pyramid sighed, it was not audible, but she felt it, a shift in weight, a breath held for too long finally released. She stayed there for what might have been minutes, or longer, and when she opened her eyes again, the stones looked the same, but she felt different. She stood and moved through the rest of the room, each circle like a bell, silent but full, each arrangement unique, some tight and small, others wide and sprawling, some with tall standing stones, others with pebbles, all of them patient. She found herself at the far end of the chamber, where a final circle waited, this one unformed, a scattering of stones, loose, not yet shaped, and beside them, a small shallow bowl, empty, she understood without knowing why. She knelt, lifted one stone, it was cool, heavy, for its size. She placed it gently near the center, then another, and another. She wasn't forming a shape, only moving, listening, letting her fingers follow the memory of others who had done the same. When she placed the last stone, she felt no completion, only pause. She stood, nodded to the bowl, and walked quietly toward the next passage. It was low again, a crawl space. She crouched, held the lantern ahead, and moved slowly. The stone brushed her shoulders. The quiet pressed close, but she felt no fear, only intimacy. The pyramid was closer here, its walls holding her gently as she moved forward. The passage opened into a chamber, so small it could barely be called a room. But she gasped softly, the walls sparkled, not with light, but with fragments of crystal set into the stone. Tiny, irregular, like the sky had cracked and left pieces behind. When her lantern light reached them, they shimmered in silence, like stars tucked into the skin of the earth. She turned slowly, let the light pass over the surfaces. The crystals danced, reflected, but did not glow on their own. Still, she felt their warmth. She knelt again, touched one gently, it was smooth on one side, rough on the other. She closed her eyes and let herself drift. Not sleep, just drift. Like the room was a current, carrying her gently forward without direction. When she opened her eyes again, she saw something on the floor, a small square of cloth, folded. She lifted it, unfolded. It carefully, inside, a single feather, white, soft, still. She held it in both hands, It reminded her of the carving she'd seen earlier, the feather near the boat. She smiled and tucked it gently back into the cloth, then placed it where she had found it. Not everything needed to be taken. Some things only needed to be seen. She bowed her head once more, then turned toward the exit. Another passage, this one sloping upward. She followed it without hurry, without question. Each footstep light, each breath drawn with ease. The tunnel turned gently, rose steadily, and eventually opened into air, she did not expect it. But there it was. A narrow platform, open to the sky, stone beneath her feet. Stars. Above, she stepped out and let the desert wind touch her skin. It was cool, dry, perfect, the stars blinked slowly in the deep sky. The moon hung low, watching. Far below, dunes stretched in soft shadows, and the horizon held the faintest thread of dawn. She sat on the stone, lantern beside her, and breathed. The pyramid rose behind her, solid, eternal, and now it had shared its heart. Not all of it, but enough, she leaned back, let the wind run through her fingers, and listened to the silence of the desert, which was never truly silent, only full of things waiting to be felt. The stone beneath her felt warmer, not from the sun, which had not yet crested the horizon, but from something older, the kind of warmth that lingers not in temperature, but in memory. Isla sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her lantern resting. Beside her, its light growing faint in the presence of morning, she watched the stars blink slower. One by one watched the deep blue sky begin to stretch its arms, the blackness of night turning a gentler shade hints. of pink and violet beginning to brush the edge of the world. The desert was still, but not empty. It breathed, she could feel at the pyramid. Behind her no longer loomed it, rested as she did it, had shared its corridors, its quiet, its forgotten corners now. It stood not as a keeper of secrets, as a friend that had gently unfolded its story. She rose, slowly rolled her shoulders back, let her arms hang loosely at her sides. No, no planche. You walked to the edge of the platform, looked down at the shifting sea of sand far below, soft ripples, curved dunes, no footprints. It felt like the entire desert had paused for her. And she smiled from here. The pyramid didn't look small or forgotten. It looked content, its stones glowing faintly in the soft light, its steps rising in steady patience toward the sky. She turned to look at the doorway she had come through, just a shadow, now a narrow opening in the wall. It had felt so vast inside, so layered, and now it seemed simple. Back to it, paused in the doorway, let her hand rest lightly on the stone. She could return. There were more hallways, could feel them, more chambers, more rooms waiting with their breath held gently. But she had seen enough for now, and she felt full, not in the way of eating, but in the way of knowing you have been held, kindly seen. Welcomed, she began to descend. The passage back was the same, but different now. She moved slowly, not because she didn't know the way, but because she did and wanted to savor it each. Turn each carved wall, each breath of cool air. She passed the chamber of crystals, basket room, the mirrored walls, all of them resting in their silence, not asking her to stay, but not hurrying her along either. She reached the chamber with the chair, the blank wall before it, still waiting, still complete in its stillness. She paused only briefly, a note, a breath. She passed the hallway with its thousands of tiny marks, the gentle crawl spaces, circles of stones, each space now layered in her memory, each one a slow step in a long and quiet song. Eventually, the light of her lantern dimmed to almost nothing, and the sky ahead of her began to glow with real morning. She reached the passage that led outside, the same place she had entered hours ago, or lifetimes ago. She stepped out into the open air and stood still. The sun was just beginning to rise, its light soft and golden, stretching long shadows across the sand. She turned back once more, looked up at the pyramid, and saw it differently. Now it was not just a monument, not just a mystery. It was a listener, a witness, a gentle keeper of time. She walked slowly around its base, let her hand brush the stone as she passed. She circled it once, no hurry, each step like a whisper. When she reached the spot where her blanket still waited, she sat down again. The sky above was painted in morning. Now the stars gone, the moon fading, the horizon blooming in warm color. She poured herself a small cup of water from her pack, sipped slowly. It tasted richer, somehow cooler, as though the quiet had flavored it. She opened her journal, not to write a story, but to draw. Her hand moved gently, sketching the spiral of the chamber, mirrored wall, the feather tucked in cloth. She wasn't recording. She was remembering, not for others, but for herself to honor what had been shared. After a while, she closed the journal, set it aside, and lay back on the blanket, eyes closed, face warmed by the early light. The wind passed over her like a lullaby, and though the day had begun, she felt no need to move. She had traveled maps without distance, and she had returned. Pyramid stood beside her, not behind, not ahead, just beside, as it always had been, as it always would be. And as her breathing slowed once more, the sun rose and the sands shifted gently. She drifted not into sleep, into stillness, the kind that stays, the kind that lingers, the kind you carry with you long after you've left the place where it began. The sun was higher now, but Isla still lay in the soft embrace of her blanket. She didn't sleep, not fully, but her body had released its last grip on tension. Her thoughts were quieter now, like reeds bending gently by a river. The desert around her had begun to stir far-off winds, traced the dunes with fingers made of light shadows, retreated slowly, as though reluctant to leave the stones they had held through the night. The pyramid glowed faintly in the morning sun, its steps softened by brightness. Its edges blurred by golden dust. Isla opened her eyes and felt no urgency, only a calm presence inside her chest, in her limbs, in her breath. She sat up, brushing the sand from her hair. The blanket beneath her still held the imprint of her shape. The ground was cool in the shade, warm in the sun, and everything around her seemed balanced. She reached into her pack for a small date, dried and sweet. She chewed slowly, savoring the texture, letting it dissolve gently, as if food and silence were both meant to be taken in that way. Now slowly, gratefully, without rush or water bottle, was still half full. She drank, then set it back beside her and watched the pyramid. Said nothing it asked, nothing, but she felt it watching her in the way old trees might, just aware, just present. She stood, rolled her shoulders again, looked up at the sky. It was cloudless, endless, blue so soft it felt like fabric stretched gently across the ceiling of the world. She turned slowly in place, taking in the horizon, the long sweeping dunes, the stillness, the small signs of life, distant birds, thin tracks in the sand left by beetles or lizards, a breeze that moved without sound. The pyramid was not the center of the world, but in this moment it was the center of hers, and it did not need to be grand to be sacred. She began to walk again, not toward the pyramid, but alongside it. Its base curved gently at a long square. She had seen only one side in her arrival. Now she wanted to see the rest, to walk the full edge of it all, feel the completeness. The opposite side of the pyramid was more weathered, more worn, its stones cracked in places, its base half swallowed by sand. And yet there was something comforting in that. It had stood this way for centuries, and it would stand long after she knelt and placed her palm against the sun-warmed stone. It was rough but solid, like the hand of someone who had worked hard and lived simply. She whispered to it, not expecting an answer, "Thank you," and the wind moved gently past her, like a nod, continuing her walk. She reached the far corner, where a large stone had shifted slightly, creating a small gap in the structure, a space not large enough to enter, but large enough to peek through. She knelt, held her lantern forward. Even in daylight, the beam reached into the darkness, revealing a narrow hollow, perhaps an old crawl space, unused and forgotten inside. The air shimmered slightly, dust motes floating like suspended stars. She didn't try to reach in, but she stayed there, just breathing. She imagined how many corners like this must exist across the pyramid, tiny space, shelf-sealed doors, whispers of doorways never meant to be found, and she felt something beautiful in that. Not everything needed to be opened. Not every secret needed to be uncovered. Some were meant to rest forever in the stillness. She rose again and continued her path around the structure. Each side revealed something new, a different tilt of stone, a different angle of light. In the west side, she found a small palm tree alone, its fronds slow in the morning breeze. It leaned slightly bent, but thriving. She sat beneath it, let the leaves cast their spotted shadows across her face, and listened. There was nothing but wind and her heartbeat, but it felt like the pyramid had come with her, that its silence had followed her outside, not clinging, just accompanying. She pulled her journal from her bag once more. This time she didn't draw. She wrote, not long paragraphs, not full thoughts, just phrases, words that rose to the surface of her quiet mind. Circle of stones, breath in the wall, light through a crack, the room that watched me. She didn't plan them, she didn't edit, just wrote them down as they arrived. When the page was full, she closed the journal gently and placed it in her lap, letting her hands rest atop it. It was not a story for publishing or sharing. It was a memory, hers, and the pyramid had given it freely. The sun was higher now, the light stronger, but it didn't feel harsh. It felt like awakening, not the kind that shakes you, but the kind that reminds you you are alive. She stood and looked once more at the pyramid, now glowing fully in sunlight. Its angles sharp again, its presence still quiet. She didn't want to say goodbye, because it didn't feel like a parting. It felt like a thread had been tied between them. Not tight, but strong, something she could carry not in her hands, but in her breath, in her step. She turned away, finally, and began walking toward the low rise of sand where her journey had begun, her footsteps soft, her shadow long, and behind her, pyramids stood not smaller in the distance, just softer, like a thought you never lose even when you're thinking of something else. The sand stretched out ahead of her in soft folds, each dune a slow wave, each step a hush. Isla walked gently, as though not to wake the desert from its sleep behind her. The pyramid rested quietly beneath the now golden sky. No longer a mystery, no longer a destination now. It was a part of her, not in memory alone, but in rhythm and breath, in the way she carried herself. Made no effort to rush her journey. Had never been about distance, only about presence every few steps. She paused not to rest, but to look, to feel the morning sun on her shoulders, to watch the wind leave thin trails across the dunes, to listen to the nothingness, which somehow felt more full than anything else. The crest of a dune, she turned back. The pyramid was smaller now, but not lesser. It shimmered faintly, a silhouette against the rising sky, its lines softened by time and wind, its presence undiminished. She sat on the slope and let her bag rest beside her. The sand beneath her was cool and the shadows warm, where the sun had reached, and she let the morning unfold without expectation. Desert was never empty. She could feel it, tiny lives beneath the sandbirds circling far above, quiet hum of distance alive in its stillness. She reached into her pack, for her journal opened to a fresh page, and wrote only one word: carried. She didn't explain it, didn't decorate it. She simply let it sit there on the page, like the pyramid sat on the earth and moving patient. She looked around. There was no path to follow, no trail of stones, but she didn't need one. Journey back would not be retracing her steps. It would be carrying the steps within her. She rose slowly, brushed the sand from her hands, and began walking east. The sun now warm on her face, the breeze gentle and dry. She let her arms swing softly at her sides, her feet falling into a rhythm that felt new and familiar all at once. Everywhere around her, desert held its silence, a silence not of absence, but of presence, of age, of patience. And she moved through it like a thread through cloth, leaving no mark. It part of the fabric. Her thoughts drifted not in worries or questions, but in gentle recollection. The crystal room, the circles of stones, mirrored walls, the single chair, the basket room, the feather folded in cloth, the shaft of sunlight falling into a pool of dust, and not just the places, but how they made her feel still, soft held. She remembered the long spiraling hallway where the walls had no words, just motion, and how her hand had followed the curves without needing to understand them. She remembered the spaces between spaces, the pauses in the pyramid, where the silence had spoken more clearly than any voice. She didn't know how long she walked. The dunes shifted gently underfoot, the light changing, but always soft. Eventually, she came upon a small rise of rock, barely taller than her shoulders, jutted from the sand like a sleeping animal, its surface flat and wide. She climbed it, sat again, and closed her eyes. The wind passed over her face, carried the scent of thaw, dry stone and sun-warmed sand, and in that stillness she imagined the pyramid again, not behind her, but within her, every curve of the passageways, every grain of dust, every ancient breath still lingering in the air. She let it all settle again, not as thoughts, as feeling. The pyramid was not a story to be told. It was a presence to be remembered, not for its facts, but for its rhythm, and it had taught her how to slow, how to listen, how to stay even. As she moved forward, she opened her eyes, took one final look at the horizon, and stood. No need to mark the place. It was marked in her now. As she descended the rock, her shadow moved ahead of her, soft long, and the sky was blue deep and wide a sea without water. She walked again, this time with the quiet joy of someone who had seen something sacred and chosen not to carry it in their hands, but in their breath. She smiled to herself, and the desert smiled with her. The sun had reached its late morning height, and Isla walked with its warmth gently pressing into her back. The pyramid no longer in sight behind her, but never far from her thoughts. She didn't feel like she had left it, only that she had stepped into another part of its story, a quieter one, part that didn't live in stone or chambers. In the spaces between her steps, the sand beneath her feet shifted, slow and soft. The horizon curved away in all directions, and though the world was open, she felt no need to rush, no need to reach an end. Each footfall was like a breath measured unforced. The desert, too, seemed in no hurry. It stretched around her like a still ocean, and she floated on it, weightless in the distance. She saw the shape of a low ridge, a familiar line of earth. It marked the boundary where she had first glimpsed the pyramid. Hours, perhaps lifetimes ago, paused at the top of a dune, turned once more, looked behind. The pyramid was only just visible, a soft triangle against the haze, its lines blurred by light and wind. It looked smaller now, but no less complete. She placed a hand over her heart and nodded once, not in farewell, but in gratitude. She knew she would carry it with her, not in memory alone, but in the quiet way she would sit, the way she would walk, the way she would listen. Her descent from the dune was slow, not out of caution, but out of reverence. At the bottom, she saw a small stone half buried in the sand, smooth, shaped by time. She picked it up, turned it in her palm. It had no markings, no carvings, just the weight of something that had waited patiently for someone to notice it. She didn't keep it, she placed it back into the sand, pressed it gently into the earth with her fingertips, a gesture of return. A quiet thank you. She continued on her water bottle, now nearly empty, but she wasn't thirsty. She felt full in a different way, like someone who had heard a song with no words, and somehow remembered every note eventually. She reached the small path where her journey had begun. It was little more than a trail of stone and dust, but it welcomed her back like an old friend. The footprints she had made hours ago had been half covered by wind, their shapes softened, faded. She smiled. Time always took its course here, and that was exactly as it should be. She sat beneath a low tree, where the branches cast soft shade, and let her body rest once more, her pack beside her, her journal in her lap. She opened to a blank page, let the pen rest lightly between her fingers. She didn't write a long account, hadn't record details. Instead, she let her hand move slowly and drew a spiral, one continuous line. No beginning, no end, just a shape that held every chamber, every step, every breath. She closed the journal and leaned her head back against the tree. The branches swayed gently above her. Sky shimmered with late morning light. Birds moved far in the distance, and the wind brushed across her cheeks like a story being told one last time. The pyramid might not speak again. She might never return to that exact place, but it had done what it came to do. It had stilled her, held her, allowed her to remember what it feels like to belong without needing to possess. And as her eyes fluttered shut and her breath deepened, she smiled one final time, because she knew that within her now there would always be that quiet place of corridors and stone feathers and mirrored walls, sand and silence. And in her dreams, if she ever needed it again, she would walk once more through the pyramid's gentle turns and find herself right where she left her, in stillness, in warmth, in peace.